This is a nice story. It came out in the New York Times. It's quite detailed and well researched, so I obviously am not allergic to reading newspaper articles and try to report them to you. I don't know if you know, but there were EVs before. They were manufactured in the US, and the story is about the history of it a little bit and maybe a little context for the EVs now in light of what happened before. Battery operated vehicles were a mainstay more than 100 years ago, but only a few still exist. One happens to be in Jay Leno's garage. Jay Leno was this famous comedian. Well, he's still around, but I don't know if he still does shows. He hosted a late night show and, kind of funny guy. So this is from New York Times that just appeared in May of 2025. I'm recording this in June, a few weeks later. More than a century ago, before Tesla rolled out its first cars, the Baker Electric Coupe and the Riker Electric Roadster rumbled down American streets. Battery-powered cars were so popular that for a time about a third of the New York taxis were electric. A third of the New York taxis were electric a century ago. But those early electric vehicles began to lose ground to a new class of cars like the Ford Model T that were cheaper and could more easily be refueled by new oil-based fuels that were becoming available around the century. Bolstered by federal tax incentives in the 1920s, the oil industry boomed, and so did gasoline-powered cars. Now I've recorded a lot of podcasts on how great the EVs are doing, how their market share is growing. It's still minuscule, and we still have a lot of legacy investments in internal combustion engines, fossil fuel cars, gasoline-powered cars, and we still invest a little bit in them, so we are locking ourselves into that technology as well. So we have to worry about what the future of EVs is, and of course you need still to worry about range anxieties, battery life, and what happens to them after they are done with their life cycle, and generally the pricing and incentives, etc., etc. The history has largely been forgotten, and almost all of the early electric cars have disappeared so completely that most people live today have let me read. Most people alive, not live. So that history has largely been forgotten, and almost all of the early electric cars have disappeared so completely that most people alive today have never seen one, and many have no idea that they have even existed in the past. A few specimens are in museums and private collections, including a fully restored Baker electric car that Jay Leno keeps in his sprawling California garage. He is a car collector. We have discussed this elsewhere. Now, car is a convenience, but if you love it like a toy, then you will collect them, right? Mr. Leno's ancient electric car has a wooden frame and a 36-inch rubber wheels. We'll look at an image soon. It looks like a stagecoach, but it's propelled by electric motors and batteries, just like a current-day Tesla Model Y or a Cadillac Lyriq. It elicited smiles and amazement from people on the streets of Burbank, California, when Mr. Leno drove it around town recently. The car may be a novelty, but it's newly relevant because the United States may be poised to repeat history. The current president doesn't like anything that talks about climate change, climate solutions, so he's actually hammering renewable energy and the related things like EVs. The Trump administration and Republicans in Congress are working to undercut the growth of electric vehicles, impose a new tax on them, and swing federal policy sharply in favor of oil and gasoline. Where that will go, we don't know. Scholars who have studied the earlier age of electric vehicles see parallels in their demise in the early decades of the 1900s and the attacks they are facing now. In both eras, electric cars struggled to gain acceptance in the marketplace and were undermined by politics. A big knock against them was that they had to be charged and ultimately were considered less convenient than vehicles with internal combustion engines, which is true. If you can drive into a gas station and pump gas in a few minutes, and we call it petrol pump here in India and elsewhere, But anyway, you get the idea. Electric cars are good if you have a towing company, President Trump said at a campaign rally in Iowa in October 2023. At another appearance the next month, he said, you can't get out of New Hampshire in an electric car. Well, of course, the story is different now because China is going gangbusters on EVs, and so will Europe, as long as somebody is producing them. And many German companies also produce them. Anyway, Japanese will continue to produce them. So charging and access to fuel were also concerns a century earlier. Americans in the 1920s wanted to explore the country, but many rural and suburban areas didn't have electricity. Imagine, 1920s, US didn't have electricity in some places. President Franklin D. Roosevelt made a big push to electrify the entire country in 1936, and the last farms were connected to the grid only in the early 1970s. That made it difficult to use electric cars in many places. Here is a nice picture of a Detroit electric automobile charging during a promotional tour from Seattle to Mount Rainier in 1919. It's a very local trip, but still, it's kind of a historic moment. Charging was a concern a century ago, and it still is. Republican leaders say that electric vehicles do not deserve subsidies in the tax code and that their tax bill levels the playing field that Democrats had tilted in favor of one technology. Of course, externalities, reduced emissions, air quality, global warming, climate change, extreme events. You get the idea. 100 years ago, lawmakers also put their thumbs on the scale, came down on the side of the oil. The oil industry has enjoyed numerous tax breaks. One was enacted in 1926 when Congress allowed oil companies to deduct their taxable income by 27.5% of their sales. The sponsor of the legislation later admitted that the incentive was excessive. We grabbed 27.5% because we were not only hogs, but the odd figure made it appear as though it was scientifically arrived at. Very smart public communication kind of optics move, right? Senator Tom Connolly, the Texas Democrat who sponsored the break, was quoted as saying in a biography by Lyndon B. Johnson, Sam Johnson's boy, a close-up of the president from Texas. So that time the Democratic Party was different and the Republican Party was different. People's perceptions were different, and many people in the South still perceive Democrats as, having fought. Let's not go there anyway. The tax break lasted for decades. It was eliminated for large oil producers and reduced for smaller companies in 1975. Perhaps unsurprisingly, crude oil became dominant. The Energy Department noted on a timeline on its website that electric cars all but disappeared by 1935. The triumph of internal combustion made long-distance travel accessible to the masses and helped power the U.S. economy, also led to deadly air pollution and has been a major cause of climate change. Now the decades-long tug-of-war between combustion engine and electric cars is intensifying again, and electric cars may be in trouble, at least in the United States. I believe they will not die away at the global scale, but it's a matter of what the market share will be as we go forward and how much they will contribute to mitigating emissions and climate change. Sales of electric cars are growing quickly in most of the rest of the world, increasing 35% in China in the first 4 months of the year and 25% in Europe, according to Row Motion, a research firm. But in the United States, sales were up a modest 11% in the first 3 months of 2025, according to Kelley Blue Book. And Elon Musk got into trouble with Tesla owners around the world, including especially Europe, because of his political shenanigans more recently. Republican leaders are pushing legislation that would eliminate many Biden administration programs intended to promote electric vehicle sales, including a $7,500 federal tax credit. They also want to impose a new annual $250 fee on electric vehicle owners to finance highway construction and maintenance. So there are some people who are very passionate about their Teslas, just like people are passionate about BMWs or whatever else they want to buy. So electric vehicles also excite some people who are progressives and are pro-environment and so on. So we'll see where it goes in a few years after the president changes, let's say. While the Republican changes probably wouldn't kill electric vehicles, they could set the industry back years. EV momentum in the US has slowed with policy uncertainty mounting, analysts at Bernstein said in a note this month. But electric cars have not just been hampered by politics, they also had to overcome gender stereotypes. Their benefits like quiet, smooth operation were considered by some men to be too feminine, and in the late 1800s and early 1900s, many models like the Baker Electric were explicitly marketed only to women. These are not trivial issues. You want to be seen in a manly car for many people, for many men, and this was an issue with the Volkswagen Bug as well, was seen as a woman's car and so on. Advertisements for the early electrics hang on the walls of Mr. Leno's Burbank garage. Make this the happiest Christmas. Give your wife an electric, proclaims an ad. On another, a young woman pleads, Daddy, get me a Baker. Okay, so Jay Leno here, the former host of The Tonight Show, now has an online show focused on cars. He loves cars. So an advertisement for an early electric vehicle here in Jay Leno's garage in Burbank. Make this the happiest Christmas. Give your wife an electric. And here, California, horseless carriage with the license plate and batteries you can see here. One of the two sets of batteries in the Baker Electric. It's just really ahead of its time. At that time, it didn't really worry about climate change. The motivation didn't come from climate change, but just technology innovation. Mr. Leno has restored a version of an early electric vehicle in his garage, in his large car collection, a 1909 Baker Electric. Men by contrast have long been pitched on the masculine virtues of gasoline vehicles that roar and thunder. In the fall of 2022, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican from Georgia who's closely allied with Mr. Trump, pushed the notion that gasoline cars are more macho at a rally. There's nothing more American than the roar of a V8 engine under the hood of a Ford Mustang or Chevy Camaro. An incredible feel of all that horsepower. But Democrats, she said, want to emasculate the way we drive. So obviously, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if you know, she's quite vocal on one side of things. Elon Musk, Tesla's chief executive, who has been working with the Trump administration, has tried to broaden the appeal of electric vehicles. His company's newest model is the Cybertruck, a massive pickup truck with lots of sharp angles, and it does have some appeal, but costs are always a factor as well. Musk has done everything he could to try to make Tesla a manly vehicle, said Virginia Scharf, an emeritus distinguished professor of history at the University of New Mexico and author of numerous books including Taking the Wheel, Women and the Coming of Motor Age. But Ms. Scharf said Mr. Musk may have gone too far. His alignment with Mr. Trump's conservative politics has alienated some of the most reliable buyers of electric cars, liberals and environmentalists who hope to move the world away from fossil fuels. So he did pay a price in terms of drop in sales, and now he's moved away from the current president anyway. Here's like the gender flip. Tesla is so associated with a kind of toxic masculinity now, as opposed to electric car being associated with femininity in the early part of the 20th century, Ms. Sharp. Okay, Mr. Leno, the former Tonight Show host, who now has an online show focused on cars, Jay Leno's Garage, has a restored 1909 Baker Electric in his collection. It has a top speed of 25 miles per hour and can travel 80 miles on a full charge. Obviously, that's not something meant to be even a commuting car at this stage, but it's definitely something that belongs in a nice museum to remind people the history of EVs, right? With a high-top cab decorated in Victorian flair, it has two fabric-cushioned bench seats facing each other and roller shades on the windows. The car was meant to accommodate fanciful women's hats, which at the turn of the century were often big and bold. As an added touch, the car's designers mounted a makeup case inside the car. How cute is that? What do men like? Mr. Leno said. Something that rolls, explodes, and makes noise. That's why men like the gasoline car, but because it frightened children, that type of thing. Mr. Leno, he loves the Baker, which he drives around Burbank at least once a year to see holiday lights and decorations with his wife. He said such vehicles had many merits. Convenience among them. They are low maintenance. They are fast, and you can fuel them at home, particularly at night when electricity is generally much more affordable than during the day. The concept of home charging is not new. Home car chargers also made their debut a century ago, only bulkier and a bit more frightful. It looked like a machine out of Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory, said Leslie Kendall, chief historian at the Peterson Automotive Museum in LA. So here is a photo, the 1998 Zero, produced by AC Propulsion, on display as part of an electric vehicle exhibit at the Peterson Automotive Museum in LA. So you can see lots of batteries lined up here. It's like you're running on battery car, like a little toy car that kids play with, remote control and the whole thing. So here is Leslie Kendall, the museum's chief historian. This is the interior of a 1976 Microdot, a gas electric hybrid from 1976. Okay, hybrid car, imagine. In 1928, Auto Redbug, which was made by the Automotive Electric Service Corporation, 1928. Cute cars, right? I hope we can bring them back and enjoy driving around towns without polluting a lot and without having big cars with big parking issues and traffic jams and so on. Mr. Kendall said electric cars could have stuck around and even done well, but they were hampered by the lack of electricity in many communities, long charging times, and their higher costs relative to gasoline vehicles. A Model T in 1908 cost about $650 compared with $1,750 for an electric road set, almost 3 times. And even now, charging stations are an issue, and of course now we also have to worry about renewable energy and carbon-free energy as well. You could carry extra gas with you, he said. You couldn't carry extra electricity. Richard Riker, a grandson of an electric car pioneer Andrew Riker, said his grandfather had identified one of the biggest stumbling blocks to the cars he designed and sold, one that lingers to this day. They didn't have charging stations out on the street corners like my grandfather said they need to, Mr. Riker said. During the Biden administration, Congress sought to address that shortcoming by allocating $7.5 billion for the construction of public chargers. Mr. Trump has halted that program. One of Andrew Riker's cars from the 1890s, a topless 2-seater cab that still sputters along at about 15 mph is on display at the Peterson Museum along with other electric vehicles, both from history and those under development. You have futuristic concepts now of electric cars, and people love their BMW electric. So if you're a BMW fan, you don't necessarily look just for noise. You are looking for the BMW brand name and what it brings. So electric BMWs, electric Mercedeses, and so on are coming or already on the market as well. Despite policy and other challenges, Mr. Riker said he was still optimistic about electric vehicles. He expects that in the coming decades, technical advances will give such vehicles a big edge over gasoline vehicles. If you can charge a car in 5 minutes and go 500 miles, he said the gasoline engine is history. Lovely articles. As I said, we don't always read scientific papers and reports. New York Times does its stories very well. So does the Vox, Manga Bay. So I read whatever I can find, as long as they are of high quality and interesting enough and relevant and important enough for our purpose of climate science, climate change, climate solutions, and so on. Okay, see you in the next